This episode brought to you by Nicholson Realty 2.0, Chuck Sewer Drain and Plumbing, Raven Choate Robinson Funeral Home.
Welcome to Garage Talk. As always, I'm Conrad. Let's go.
I'm Ted. It's time to rock and roll.
Teddy, today with us, we have Tim Phillips. He's the administrator for the Hoosier Prep Gridiron Facebook page.
Yeah, and who doesn't love Indiana football? High school football.
Yes. Welcome, Tim.
Great, guys. Great to be with you. And I appreciate anybody who visits the site and comes to take a look at the content. And football season will be here before you know it. We're just a couple months away.
Yep. Off-season programs will be kicking off real soon.
You bet.
If it hasn't already. Hey, could you tell us the origin story of how you thought up this Hoosier Prep Facebook page?
Sure. Well, it kind of goes way back. I've been involved in football, I think, probably since I fell out of the cradle. My dad went to East Chicago Roosevelt High School. He was high school football All-American, played football for Indiana University. So I always kind of wanted to play ball. And I'm from Northwest Indiana, the beautiful region. Grew up in that part of the state and went to Highland High School. And I played football at Highland. Then I played a couple of years of college football at St. Joe College in Rensselaer. But after I left and kind of started my business life, I stayed involved with football somehow. I was an official for about 15 years. I was an assistant coach for a couple of years. I was a writer, and I started writing in high school, and then I continued to write for local newspapers as a stringer, the Hammond Times, Gary Post Tribune, Indianapolis Star, Johnson County Daily Journal. So always wanted to stay close to the game. And then about 20 years ago, as we all know and love, the Gridiron Digest got started, which was really kind of the first foray into the internet and message boards. And I was very active there and pretty quickly got the itch that I kind of wanted to do my own version. But be honest with you, I'm a businessman at heart. I'm a capitalist, and I wanted to build a for-profit page if there was a way to do that. And so I started a couple of different versions of it on the old message board platform. But what really took this thing off is when I jumped over to Facebook. And as you guys well know, the Facebook reach is just endless. And it shocks me every day, every week, the kind of reach that we get on Facebook and how it just spreads like fire. I had a page 4 years ago called Hoosier High School Football, which I ran for about a year. I wound up selling that page. I kind of missed it after a couple months and decided to start another one. So November 7th of 2 years ago, 2020, 2.5 years ago, 2022 is when we officially started Hoosier Prep Gridiron.
Okay.
And so, today we're chasing after 22,000 followers now. I think there's a lot of upside from there. And heading into this season, we've got some pretty good momentum. We've tried some things this off season with some other sports. I'm still not completely sure what works and what doesn't. But the fans love sports. They love to talk high school football. They love to talk college football. Every now and then we talk a little bit of NFL, but high school football is where the action is.
Yep. And you mentioned Facebook. That's social media does have its pluses. There's a lot of complaints about it, but it does have its upside in certain situations.
Well, one of the things that I really like about our page is if you go back and you look at a lot of the old message board pages, and you guys have been there, maybe even with your own page, very heavy male-dominated conversation. You got 95% men who are coming to these pages. out of our 22,000 followers, 38% are female.
Wow.
That's
Which
awesome. Yeah.
really,
Accomplishment.
when you think about that, those are football moms, those are
Mhm.
coaches' wives,
Yep.
those are high school teachers and administrators. And I just love it because, guys are not sharing information. The women are doing the
Yep.
sharing of the information.
Yep.
And that really has really driven our growth, is the growth of the female and the women that really get behind, obviously they're going to get behind their kids, they're going to get
Right.
behind their teams, and they're generally very involved in their community. I'd like to see that number go over 40. I don't know if I want it to go past 45.
Yeah.
But I would bet you that we probably have more female listeners and readers than probably any other football site that I could think of.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
That's quite an accomplishment, Tim. What separates Indiana football from other states?
It's a good question. I think the biggest thing for us, Texas, Georgia, California, Pennsylvania, Alabama, these states are always going to be top 4, top 5 in the development of high school football players. It's pretty much a religion there. It's a real dichotomy here because everybody knows we're a basketball state.
Oh, yeah.
Always have been a basketball state. And I still got a lot of guys out there that tell me that they think we've become a football state, but I'm not really sure. I think we're people still look at Indiana as a basketball state, but we treat football almost kind of like the basketball from a tournament standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really like is that, there's 320 high schools in Indiana that play football. And we are set up perfectly to have a 9-game regular season and then a 6-week postseason tournament. So the teams that win state championships are playing 15 games.
Right.
Half of the schools are 1-and-out in the tournament, so those schools are playing 10. Everybody else is playing 11, 12, 13 games, which really is a full schedule. So I think that the math just works perfectly. The blind draw of our postseason tournament. Again, a lot of people would like to see seeding. I am not at all for it because I think all that seeding will do is cause more blowouts in the first round.
Right.
And you'll have the top teams on opposite sides of the brackets. There are very, very few upsets in high school football. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
And the best teams are going to win. The teams that are stacked are going to win. The teams that have the talent are going to win. But having some of these first round matchups of a number 1 ranked team versus another 4, I think it's great. And I think people watching and waiting for the draw is a big deal. So that kind of is the connection to basketball that I think the IHSAA has done a really good job of keeping kind of the history and the nature of how we do things here in Indiana. It's a little bit different. Right over the line in Illinois, they think we're crazy.
Right.
They try to run their high school football like the NFL over there.
Uh-huh.
With seedings and qualifications and those types of things. But the number of schools, 6 classifications, a 15-week season, the math just works perfectly. And I don't think we could have a better Thanksgiving weekend state finals event than we have. We have a world-class stadium,
Yep.
in Indianapolis with the dome. And I'm thinking the old Hoosier Dome.
Yeah, Lucas Oil.
Lucas Oil. I mean, what better place could you ask for? For these kids to play at. So, and then finally, I think the talent has improved tremendously here over the last 10 years, and that's really been driven by what is happening in Indianapolis. With the big 6A power schools. All the weightlifting facilities, the new stadiums, the bigger coaching staffs, more of our kids in Indiana are being recruited, are rating higher. It used to be very difficult to find a 4-star kid coming out of Indiana.
Right.
Last year we had 8 of them. We had 8 4-star recruits come out of Indiana. Now next year there's only 1, so it's very cyclical. But the quality of what you see on the field remains very high, and we have really good coaches throughout the state, dedicated guys, and really I'm very impressed with the young guys that are coming up. The young 27, 28, 30-year-old guys. Really a lot of sharp young guys out there that give me a good feeling that where the game is going to be in 10 years is a very good place.
I love that. I love that. With over it's over 30 states allow high schools to have NIL leak in there. And I know that Indiana is not doing that, the IHSAA, but I'm sure they're getting some pressure. Do you see the NIL ever affect high school football? Will it leach in from college?
I'm still trying to absorb what's happening in college.
Yeah.
And like I said, I went to St. Joe, but I graduated from Indiana University. And what happened at IU last year is unfathomable. And the way that they were able to turn a perennial 3-9, 4-8 team into an 11-2 team, that was playing in the college football tournament. Indiana traditionally is very conservative. The IHSAA is very conservative group. They're very deliberate in what they do. They don't do anything quickly or on a fly. 2 things that just happened: the transfer clause. Now we have open transfers now for the first time. Where kids are going to be able to move from school to school one time. And the family doesn't have to pack up and move. So
right.
It's a great thing. It took the IHSA a long time to get there. Another decision that was just made by the IHSAA was this idea of co-op football,
Right.
Which I was a big fan of, and I think we still have a participation problem in football, especially at the lower levels. I don't worry about the 4A, 5A, 6A schools. They've got plenty of numbers, plenty of resources. But a lot of these 2A, 1A schools, you got 22 kids, 24 kids. The possibility of them consolidating and creating one team out of that makes a lot of sense. But the IHSAA decided to take a pass on that.
Right.
So, again, I think I wouldn't be surprised if 2-3 years down the road, once this transfer thing kicks in, they'll take another look at the co-op. NIL, I'm in no hurry to see us go there. And, to see a college quarterback getting paid $6, $7, $8 million, is just mind-boggling. I don't know. You've seen a lot of these coaches. Nick Saban, he had enough.
Yeah.
He didn't want anything to do with it. A lot of the college basketball coaches have hung it up over the last few years. So, I don't know how a coach can manage a roster when 70% of your guys turn over from year to year.
Yeah, exactly. That's
it's just and we're going to talk a little bit about coaching turnover, but there's never a day off. These guys literally never get a day off.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, they had the summer off and they had time to spend with their family. Now they're either coaching in season, which is full time, or off season. They're running camps, or they're doing 7-on-7, or they're having some kind of weightlifting contest, or they're going to a coaching clinic. If the high school coaches have to start negotiating NIL, we're not going to have any coaches left.
right. Yeah.
So I hope that doesn't come anytime soon.
Well, it's I don't want to say it's all youth parents. They're already hard enough on their kids uh, in the youth leagues. I'd
Sure.
hate to see them be even harder because this could like just for example, in a community like the one we live in, we the school system has 70% of their kids that go to school here on free and reduced lunch.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure it's not going to be in the millions of dollars, and I'm sure that NIL money would be one or two kids, maybe. I don't think it would reach into every high school, or I'd hope not.
Yeah. Well, what we're really seeing is I hear from a lot of parents, and we encourage the parents to submit whatever they want to do to promote their kids because the kids are really having a hard time with recruiting right now. And with the transfer portal and with NIL, these coaches at the college level are under so much pressure to win that they're going to take the 21-year-old kid out of the transfer portal instead of the 18-year-old kid out of Center Grove,
Mhm.
regardless of how good that kid is.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing is that it's almost like a domino effect as it pushes down. The um, the 4 and 5 star guys, they're always going to be taken care of. But a lot of those kids that maybe could have played in the Mid American Conference or Conference USA, or maybe at Northwestern, Purdue, and Indiana when all three of them were bad,
Yep.
those guys are now playing at Marion or Indiana Wesleyan, or Trine, and they're trying to get some film so that somebody will give them an NIL deal so that they can eventually move up.
Mm-hmm.
So when those guys, what that does is that pushes your fringe guys from high school, that used to play in the D3 level, Rose Holman guys, DePaul guys, Wabash. They're losing out opportunities now as well. So it's just it pushes everybody down. So we do whatever we can to help the kids with recruiting. We created the Hoosier Prep Gridiron recruiting portal,
I
and
see that.
what this is that we encourage parents to send in information, um, send us photos. Facebook. The interesting thing about Facebook, and some people may disagree, whenever we run video on Facebook, it performs very poorly. It's really a medium for pictures. That's how Facebook got started. And I'll give you a perfect example. I can interview, let's say I interview the coach, Coach Baresh at
Hmm.
Mississippi last year. I would interview him in a written format. I would send him 7 or 8 questions. He would respond. I would post it to the page. We would get 15 to 20,000 page views. If I did that exact same interview with him in the format we are in right here on Zoom,
Hmm.
we'd get 2,300 views.
Wow.
And what happens is people don't want to invest that 15 or 20 or 30 minutes. They want to read and they
Yep.
want to look at the pictures,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and then they want to move on to whatever's next. Um, so it's just a different it's a different situation now, and the drivers are completely different. But back to the NIL issue again. Um, I haven't heard much talk about it at the high school level. I have heard about it in Texas, in Florida, in Georgia, uh, and let's let them figure out all the dirty issues that come along with it, and
Yeah,
then maybe when it's manageable, somebody will try it here in Indiana.
I can almost guarantee the IHSAA is watching. They're very good at studying
They are.
before they make moves, and I know right now they have it prohibited or a prohibition on it. Um, and someday it might even leak into the state legislation. Uh, with Senate Bill 1 going on.
Well, that's how the transfers got approved.
Yeah.
When it finally hit the state legislature, then the big guys jumped on it, and it became a statewide voting issue. So, sometimes it takes something like that to affect change. If you guys remember back in the days of the message board, all we talked about was public versus private. That was the
Yeah.
big topic. That was what drove all of the conversation. And then the IHSAA, under Bobby Cox's leadership, implemented the success factor, which, in my view, has been a phenomenal success. And I went to Catholic grade school, Our Lady of Grace grade school in Highland, Indiana, and I went to public high school, Highland High School in Highland, Indiana. So I love both of them, public schools and private schools. And but what was happening was, the private schools were just flat out winning way more than their fair share of the state championships.
Yep.
And, the IHSA came in and implemented the success factor, which has been, I think, a huge win. It's really leveled the playing field. Just an example, to your point, of what they can do after they really study something very closely and deliberately make a decision and not rush into anything. They continue to tweak the success factor, but I think it's been fantastic, and we're starting to see other states copy it as well.
Yeah. We're going to switch gears here onto something I don't know about you, but I hate mowing grass. Grass or turf, man. 37% of high schools in Indiana have turf fields. Is that going to keep going up?
I love to cut grass.
You're invited over to my house. I will run the drill.
Yeah, I've had 15 houses and moved around a lot in my business career, and I always bought a house with a nice lawn because I enjoy doing it. That number is surprisingly low. It seems like it's more like 80% have turf, because it just exploded over the last 5 years. And, you can't drive around Indianapolis and find a grass field. The vast majority of the non-turf fields are at the small schools, 1A, 2A level. And, if you go up into North Central Indiana, Northwest Indiana, Northeast Indiana, a lot of these small 1A, 2A schools, they're still playing on grass. But I think the data is very conclusive that it's a money-losing game to stay on natural grass. And, everybody can use the turf field. The turf fields are much, much better and softer and easier on the players' legs and joints than they were 10 years ago. So the technology is so much better. They look great. Plus, you can monetize that turf field by selling naming rights, sponsorships, advertising. So, it's an endless stream of cash for a high school if they want to turn it into that. I don't know if you guys saw the recent photos of the new Speedway turf in Indianapolis, but oh man, is it cool. They worked with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and created kind of a football artificial turf version of the Speedway, and it just looks spectacular. So I don't think it comes down to money. I remember the number was about $750,000 to install a new field.
Yeah,
and that probably is higher now. But 4A, 5A, 6A football for the most part is played on turf. 1A, 2A, 3A for the most part is played on grass. And I think as schools get around to the affordability issue, they'll continue to roll back the turfs, but or roll out more turf.
Yeah, Teddy,
but I don't see that changing.
Do you know if all the fields here in Grant County are turf? Because I'm thinking they are.
No, Madison Grant
still
plays Grant, but they had the option of putting turf in, and the coach said no. He wanted grass. So
yeah, and it's not always up to the coach.
Right, and you're right. And
it's usually, especially with the turnover we have. you know.
Right. Yeah.
Usually, that is a very high administrative level decision because of the cost. But the band can use it, the soccer team can use
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Anybody can use that field, and it's very durable. So it's hard to argue going back. Even my old high school, Highland, I don't know how Highland was able to hold out for so long, but we finally got our turf field 2 years ago.
Wow.
And yeah, which was kind of a surprise to me. But I think you'll continue to see them come along, but they're certainly not cheap, and certainly a much larger burden, for a Class 1A school like a Madison Grant or an Alexandria or an Elwood, Blackford. These schools, they don't have the cash that Westfield does.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or even, a Leo or a Huntington North.
Yep.
That's a lot of money. It's a big decision. And again, I think they all eventually do what's best for their own high schools.
Right. And like we know, high school football is your money maker for that high school. That's
as long as you're winning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, but so your revenue there.
Yeah.
But like you said, everybody can use it. You're still going to have injuries, but like you said, it's not as bad as some of the fields we used to play on where,
Sure.
People are really getting hurt, especially the knees.
I think the injury is a little bit higher on non-contact injuries on turf.
Yeah, guys cutting, in the open field, and and frankly, a lot of that is the athletes today. These are dudes. I mean, some of the players that we're seeing, some of these juniors and seniors, these are not the same kind of kids that played 10, 15, 20 years ago. They're getting so much additional coaching, private tutoring, private mentoring, all the camps that they go to. It's a huge investment in time, in money, for a family to do this. But, for some of them, the payoff is going to be there, down the road. Yeah, the injuries, they still happen. And, I love nothing better than a 17-14 slobber knocker in the mud every now and then. But those are getting hard to find.
They are.
You don't see those kind of games too much anymore.
No.
I like that term, slobber knocker. I'm going to use that.
But that, like you mentioned earlier about, the talent level now, and you just mentioned it now about, these guys, some of these guys are just, they're a man child. But I think a lot of that has to do with, all these schools now have strength coaches. Back when I played years ago, advanced PE was our weighting class with the PE teacher. Now you've got these guys with degrees coming in and just, I know the one we had here has really changed some people's lives.
Yeah, back in the day, the strength teacher was also the driver's ed instructor. So
true.
And there was no specialty involvement. All you got to do is look at some of these weight rooms. Avon opened up a brand new weight room last year. Man, it looks like something you'd find, out of the Mid-American Conference, and a huge investment. All the kids use it, all the sports use it.
Yep.
But to your point, a lot of these staffs, I don't think there's a school in either the MIC, the HCC, the Mid-State Conference, Conference Indiana, the big 5A, 6A schools, Duneland Conference up in the region, that does not have a strength and conditioning coach.
Yep.
It's almost, you got to have it. And, one school that, it's kind of close to home for me, Crown Point, Class 6A school up in the region. They've got 7 former head football coaches on that staff, along with the head coach, Coach Bazia. So you can see how some of these guys are funneling to some of the stronger programs.
Right.
But they also have a full strength and conditioning staff, as do most of them. Speed development goes right along with that. Lafayette Jefferson, I think, is one of the schools that does it as good as anybody, combining, speed, strength, together. Great coaching staff there under Coach Shanley. So yeah, great point. If you don't invest in that area, you can't compete at the highest level anymore, especially at 5A, 6A,
Right.
because these teams have gotten so big. You're looking at 6'3", 6'4", 285, 295, 300 normal.
Uh-huh.
Three, 4, 5 guys on a team that size, and they're just not they're not just coming out of the womb like that. They're building these guys.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
And
Bigger, stronger, faster.
Yeah, building them through the strength and conditioning programs, and it's pretty serious stuff. And you can see the ones. I always like to go back and use the old uniform test. How does a kid fill out a uniform?
Mhm.
And the way a kid at a 3A school fills out a uniform versus a 6A school,
Yeah.
it's usually pretty clear. You can see the difference.
Yep.
And that's not to say that there's not some athletes down there, because we got great athletes in every class. But they run college type programs at the top end of 6A.
Right.
The top 15 programs in the state, you would think they were small to mid-sized colleges the way they run their operation.
So I got to ask you, man, what's your favorite field? What's
My
the
favorite
field
high school field?
that you've been to here?
That's an easy. That's easy. Center Grove. And the main reason for that, my daughter went to Center Grove,
Oh, okay.
and I love my old school Highland, but the atmosphere at Center Grove, it feels like a college game day atmosphere. I remember going to the season opener back in 2004 against Roncalli. And, it was a mid-August day, 75 degrees. It kind of felt like being on a college campus on a Saturday afternoon.
Man.
That's cool.
But that is probably from an environment, high-end football, fan involvement, facilities, the band, everything that goes with it. I haven't seen anything better than
Concession stand?
that.
Concession? Hey, look at, I like a good concession stand. If
Yeah,
they got
well,
a good nachos.
If you want a high-end steak sandwich, they can take care of you there.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I'm sure they can. There's some really cool small stadiums around the state too, like Mechaniqua up in the Three Rivers Conference has got a outstanding facility. Just anywhere you look up in Northeast Indiana, Adams Central, South Adams have great small school facilities up there. Even you come down, probably the one I should mention is Evansville Rights. Probably the most iconic football stadium in Indiana is way down in Evansville. That is a gorgeous stadium. It's world renowned for the design. So there's a lot of really cool places to play football in Indiana. But you don't have to travel far to find a pretty solid stadium. I would say there was a period about 10 years ago where they kind of overbuilt. And some of these stadiums they were building these 7,000-8,000 seat stadiums, and a lot of these schools are drawing 1,200, 1,500,
Right.
2,000 people. So it could go both ways. But Indiana has, I think it's in our DNA to build gigantic high school facilities for the kids. It goes back to basketball.
Yep.
Back in, when they built the Chrysler Center at Newcastle, 15,000 people can fit in that place. It's like a Big Ten facility. And there's 10 of those stadiums, 10, 15 stadiums like that throughout the state. So I think that kind of nudged over into football a little bit, but great facilities. We're very blessed in this state to have good facilities. The the school districts invest heavily in these kids.
Yeah.
Great uniforms, good coaching staffs. They keep them healthy, give them great facilities, give them good schedules to play in, put them in good conferences, so that they're competing against teams of like size. And so I couldn't say more about the high school administrations, the athletic directors, the school boards. They do a terrific job. And every now and then you're going to run into a problem here and there, but on the whole, we got it pretty good here in Indiana.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we've got to touch on this because with 64 vacancies, 64 coaching vacancies, is there a coaching shortage, or is that just what's going on?
I don't think there's any shortage. I think there's a retention problem.
Okay.
It's a huge retention problem. I started tracking this about 5 years ago, and I can remember the first year, I think there were about 45 coaching changes. And I started doing the math. There's 320 schools that play football in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say if you average 50 coaching turns a year, over a 3-year period, that's 150 schools changing hands. That's like a 45% turnover rate over a 3-year period. This particular year is the biggest one I have ever seen. We just had 2 more coaching changes this week. Your coach Baresh at Mississinawa. We just heard about a coaching change at Portage High School, 6A school up in the region. So out of those 64 changes, I believe 58 of those jobs have been filled. Bottom line is time. It's become such a time-consuming endeavor for a lot of these guys. And we see a lot of turnover with these 26, 27, 28-year-old guys. And I think it just becomes overwhelming for them. I think a lot of them really have no clue what they're getting into, and once they realize what they have to do to stay competitive, what they have to do and what they thought was their free time or their family time, it just becomes too much. And there's obviously a lot of pressure to win as well. We've also had a lot of longtime coaches reach retirement. And, every year, a good 10, 15 Hall of Fame level guys are stepping down and moving away from the game. So, it's a real concern. People talk about it a lot. If this trend of 65 continues, we'll be way over that 50% turnover a 3-year. The biggest problem, though, I see is it really affects the programs. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a perfect example. LaPorte High School up in Northwest Indiana. They've had 5 coaching staffs in the last 6 years. In 2014, LaPorte won a semi-state and went all the way to the state finals. I think they lost to Cathedral. Over the last 6 years, I think they've won 3 or 4 games. So all of this coaching turn, these kids, literally, the senior class last year had a different coach every year. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Come in, new coach. And it just kills the program continuity.
Yeah.
It really has a negative impact on the community involvement. When the community sees all this chaos, all this turnover, they even see the kids. The kids are down, they're losing, they're not in a competitive situation. You start to lose that community involvement, and it's tough. So it has a big effect on the programs. We interviewed the new head coach at Eastern Pekin High School, way down Southern Indiana in the Mid-Southern Conference. They were like this far from dropping their football program. Coaching turnover, no success, low numbers, lots of injuries, poor community involvement, no money coming into the program, old uniforms, no new equipment. You can't compete, and if you're a parent, if I'm a parent, do I want my kid going into a program and seeing him go 2-38 over a 4-year period? I'm not sure that's the experience that I would want for my own kid.
Exactly.
So yeah, the turnover thing is a real concern. I think a lot of people say, well, it's a money issue. Well, um, teachers' pay is teachers' pay.
Mm-hmm.
And, it has gone up quite a bit over the last few years. These guys all get coaching stipends.
Yep.
And everything in this world is negotiable. You learn that in the business world.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody's really going to get rich off of this other than maybe those top dozen guys at the very top, that are pulling down 6-figure salaries and nice big coaching stipends. So, everybody says, well, we get into it for the kids. Well, if you're going to get into it for the kids, then stay in it for a while.
Exactly.
And if do your due diligence up front, and if it looks like it's going to be too much and this is not what you want to do, then, find something else to do. But it really hurts these programs. And this is part of the whole co-op issue. All of these schools that would potentially be co-op schools, they all have a 10% winning percentage. They all have high coaching turnover. They all have low numbers. They all have old facilities. It's not rocket science. So it's a tough deal, and I'm surprised every year when I see some of the names that come up, of guys that are leaving. Good coaches. You would think they were in their prime. Fortunately, as I said earlier, I'm encouraged by the fact that there's some really, really sharp young guys that are moving their way up that are going to be, making their mark here over the next 3, 5, 7 years. So I think there's a lot of talent out there. I don't think there's any shortage. One other little bit of a concern recently that I'm starting to see is head coaches leaving to become assistants at other schools.
Mm-hmm.
You wonder, why would somebody do that? Well, probably has something to do with the pay. Maybe it has something to do with wanting to be with a winner. But we're starting to see more of that. And that's also a bit of a concern, because even if you throw transfers in there, if all the good players and all the good coaches go to just a select amount of schools, that's going to destroy competitive balance.
Right.
And it's going to further divide the haves and the have-nots. And there's a lot of schools right now they're really kind of teetering on the edge. It's really interesting. You see a school go 8-2 one year and then 1-9 the next.
Uh-huh.
It's like, how did that happen? And but it can happen. But it usually doesn't happen to the high resource schools. They consistently are able to go out there and perform, year on year. And, they're going to have some ups and downs, but they're never really going to tank it, and go winless or win one game. So yeah, big issue. I'm not sure what the IHSA they're very quiet about this issue. Paul Neidig, the current commissioner, who I think does a pretty good job, I'd like to see them get more active in this area, because it's a problem. It's hurting a lot of the lesser schools. Mm-hmm. And I would not be surprised. I've been saying this for 10 years. I came up with the term contraction about 10 years ago. And to me, what contraction is when a high school shuts down their football program and reallocates that money to something else. And we've seen that with half a dozen or a dozen schools here over the last 4 or 5 years. If things don't change from the coaching standpoint, that could push more schools over the edge. Where an athletic director says, to his superintendent, hey, you know what? I've hired a new football coach 5 of the last 6 years. Why are we doing this? We could be spending this money on the swimming team or on the band.
Right.
Or we could send the show choir to Florida to perform or do something like that. We don't have to have a football team. I'm a football guy, but football's a tough game.
Mhm.
It's not for everybody. And I don't believe that every athletic director is obligated to offer football on the athletic menu for the kids. There's about 440 schools, high schools in Indiana. So that already 120 of them have decided we don't play football.
Right, right.
So it's not like, this is a new precedent. Um, I would be an advocate for some of these schools that may be on the edge. If they contracted, sometimes less is more.
Yes.
You have a higher level of game being played because you're having more balance. You're cutting some of the programs off the bottom that maybe can't cut it.
Right.
And a lot of people don't want to hear that. They don't like to hear that. They want the kids to have all the opportunities in the world. But again, it goes back. If you're the parent and your kid won one game in 4 years, was that a good experience for that kid?
Exactly.
I'm not really sure it is.
And Tim, that's very refreshing what you just said, because everybody's so um, cautious about saying, well, this isn't for everyone,
Sure.
because this is the culture is turning to being inclusivity, and everybody gets a participation trophy.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear about that all the time. And if you guys, we've all played, and what goes into it. Back when I played, we didn't have to do a third of what these kids are doing today.
Right, right.
And how much time and effort, that they have to put into this. But it's not for everybody.
Mm-mm.
And I wouldn't be surprised at the college level if within the next 3 to 5 years we start to see colleges dropping football as well, because where we're going. There's going to be two conferences,
Two
the
super
Big Ten and
conferences.
the SEC,
Yep.
and everything else is going to be junior level football.
Yep.
And who's going to want to play at those schools? How are they going to get players? Who's going to go watch the games?
Right.
So there's going to be some colleges that are going to be dropping the game. It's going to happen. And maybe not this year, next year, but with the trend that we see right now, with everything consolidating into the power elite,
Yep.
The writing is on the wall. It's going to happen.
I can definitely see that happening. But and like you mentioned earlier, some of these coaches, especially the younger ones, stick it out. But then there's also where the administration needs to give this coach some leeway too, and give him 5 years. If he's willing to stay, I say give him that. See what he can do.
I think it takes about 5 years to get that class out and get your program implemented, because you do have to start dipping down into the middle school. And I've seen where you had talked about adding some middle school in on your Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
I have I go on a rant about middle school sports. If you got time, Tim, because
Yeah.
here it goes. Middle school sports, everything is at the end. So volleyball ends and then basketball begins.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that way in middle school. So one thing after another. It's not that way in high school. You have
Right.
multiple sports being played. And what I've noticed in middle school, and I call middle school the bottleneck of sports, of student athletes. I've seen where the best basketball player does not go on to play basketball
Mm-hmm.
because the sport that they want to play plays alongside basketball, and they
Sure,
can't
you've got
step-
overlap and crossover.
I've seen where the best volleyball player ends up going to play soccer, and the best soccer player goes to play volleyball.
Yeah.
I think that's like that would be really hard to guesstimate. And plus, you don't know if Billy grows another inch after 8th grade. I'm one
Sure.
of them. I was 5'7" in 8th grade. I'm still five. Well, I'm probably 5'5" now.
Going the other direction.
Yeah, I'm going the other direction. But
Yeah.
that's just my thoughts. Am I wrong? Am I way off?
Well, we just started talking about junior high kids
Hmm.
just in the last couple weeks. And I like to poll our readers and I like to give them an opportunity to express their views and give us their opinion on what they want and what they don't want. And overwhelmingly, um, the sentiment was we don't want to talk about this on this page. These kids are too young. It's too soon for parents to be pushing these kids, or even coaches to be pushing these kids, or the kids themselves, to be pushing, themselves. In this day of the internet, um, everybody's promoting themselves,
Hmm.
Oh,
and
yeah, for sure.
however you can do it, you're going to promote yourself one way or the other. But I think I think we decided we just don't want to go there. There's enough content 9 through 12 for football right now, and I had a coach kind of chew me out last week because he was upset that his name was mentioned by a junior high player because there was some real question about whether the statistics were accurate. And then the kid's dad came in and gave a quote, which was questionable as to where that quote came from. So the reality is, I don't run into any of that kind of stuff with the high school content.
Hmm.
I'd rather not have to deal with it with the junior high stuff.
Oh man.
So uh, every now and then, if there's something worth mentioning, we'll do it. But we're not heading into that direction. One of the other questions you guys touched on earlier was other sports. Are we going to do other sports? And I've kind of dabbled in the basketball tournament. Um, we've touched a little bit on girls softball. I've found that our readers like rankings.
Mhm.
And when the Girls Softball Association rankings come out every week, they get very widely read. People like that stuff. I'm kind of a statistics geek, and a lot of people are still like that. They
Hmm.
like to read that kind of stuff. Um, but when we do features on players, it just really hasn't resonated. The one thing that we are staying focused on is wrestling. And there's a lot of crossover, obviously, between football and wrestling.
Right.
We do a lot of dual sport, multi-sport features on kids, and a lot of them are football players and wrestlers, and a lot of them are the same fans. So we have a sub page for wrestling, but for right now, we're probably just going to dabble a little bit in some of these rankings that the people like to read. But as far as expanding, I don't see that coming in the short term.
We're gonna skip over some stuff, and possibly have you back because I have a ton more questions for you. But
Great, I've enjoyed it.
Tim, what's your vision for Hoosier Prep Gridiron over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I've been shocked by the growth, and currently, all I can do is go by the metrics that Facebook gives us.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would tell you is, I mentioned earlier, I'm a businessman, I'm a capitalist, and this page is on what they call the Facebook Digital Creators Bonus Program. So they
Yeah.
basically fund us to run this page, and it's an invitation only program. So obviously we had to have something, that was resonating with the Facebook people out in Menlo, California. But they started funding this page about a year ago. And at our peak, we were reaching a 500,000 people per week.
Wow.
And again, that's what the Facebook metrics are telling us. So, if we have 25,000 followers, that doesn't even touch the total number of people that are actually looking at the page. So the potential to grow is huge.
Yeah.
And I'm a big guy on followers. I think followers drive all the metrics, and all the metrics that determine the financial performance for the page are anything that the reader does, whether he or she clicks open a picture or forwards it or likes it, or makes a comment or does make some kind of a motion with it. There's 320 football schools, as I mentioned. I've probably talked to the coaches at half of them over the last 3 years in one way or another, either through a coach's corner interview or a digital interview, or sometimes I'll go out and I'll participate and go to a 7-on-7. There was one at Taylor University last year. I think pretty close to you guys. I went. There were 16 schools there, so I think I interviewed 12 or 13 coaches at that event. So we're just going to kind of keep doing what we're doing. And what I find is the great thing about Facebook is you get immediate feedback. If you're trying something for the first time, you can tell pretty quickly whether the readers like that or don't. Clearly, they don't want us covering junior high football players. That was obvious.
Yeah.
Clearly, they're not real big on baseball and softball, other than bits and pieces here and there. I will tell you one thing that's very interesting, and this may be counterintuitive, but if you look at my very best markets are markets like North Judson, Knox, Maconaquah, South Adams, Heritage Hills. A lot of these 1A, 2A, 3A schools where Facebook has become almost kind of part of the local lingo. Everybody uses it. They use it to communicate. They use it for emergency situations. When I get into the inner city, I get very, very low numbers.
Really?
Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, South Bend. People don't use Facebook to communicate. And now, some of the big suburban programs, Center Grove, Westfield, Carmel, Brownsburg, Avon, it's a little bit hit or miss, but those schools get so much coverage, that sometimes we're just like another guy, that's covering their program. But if we're covering North Judson or Knox, they don't get a lot of coverage there. And because those guys up there are covering Merrillville and Hobart, Valparaiso, and Crown Point. So these smaller communities, Tippecanoe Valley High School, fantastic. They've got they are just in love with that program there. Peru is another one, where they're all over that. Northwestern High School, had some success last year. People came out of the woodwork. Tell City, way down southern Indiana. Some of these, and then you go into Evansville, and the big Evansville conference is covered very heavily by the Evansville Metro newspaper. So my numbers down there are not very strong. So it's really interesting what you learn. Where are we going? I want to continue to try to build our numbers up, and I'd like to see us hit 25,000 followers before the season starts. Maybe pick up another 5 or 10 during the season. I would like to mention our sponsors. We've got a couple sponsors that we're working with now. We work with American Home Insurance. And if you know the IHSAA, they've been with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance since the beginning of time. So I figured, heck, let's hook up with an insurance guy.
There you go.
So far, these folks have been great to work with. They've got agency offices all over the state. So every high school is within, 5, 10, 15 minutes of a American Family Insurance office. We also do some fundraising, and we work with a company called Momentum Fundraising. All these schools, they do fundraisers once or twice a year, raise money, buy uniforms, travel. So we work with the high schools there as well. And so, it's I've been lucky. I had a staff of writers last year. We had up to 5 writers on staff at one point last year. And these guys will do features. And we would go do a feature on the running back at Cloverdale High School, 30,000 page views, something like that. So we've kind of learned to go after the players and the teams and the markets where we get the biggest bang for our buck as far as response.
Yes.
And as much as I like the Franklin Central program in suburban Indianapolis, every time we do a feature on Franklin Central, nobody reads it.
Oh.
So I'm not sure why that is. So we try to learn, from the data that we have, and take that and leverage that to try to give the readers what they want.
Knowing your market is half the battle, man. Half the battle.
It really is. It really is. And the statistics and the data is endless. You could hire somebody just to be an analyst to try to figure out how to maximize this information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite ready for that. We try to skim the best information across the top, but the format is fantastic. And one thing I've struggled with is a lot of people have asked, why don't you use Twitter? And kind of leverage the Facebook along with the Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the big difference there is the demographics of our page. 80% of our followers are between 35 and 55, which from an advertiser's perspective is gravy. I mean, that's where you want to be. But Twitter is really a broadcast video medium. And Facebook, regardless of what people continue to say, you see a lot of video on Facebook, but it's not what drives the numbers. What drives the numbers on Facebook, at least in our case, has been written content and pictures, photography. But I've tried to do some things on Twitter, and just hasn't resonated. And to be honest with you, I'm not quite the bro age, which is what the Twitter guys, like to use. And so it's a little bit of a different medium for us. But I will tell you this, I get a lot of content off Twitter because the high schools use it, and the high schools will post a lot of content that we'll tap into. And that helps drive our page numbers as well.
Well, before we let you go, please tell all our listeners and our watchers, tell them where they can find you.
Well, we're Hoosier Prep Gridiron on Facebook, easy to find. We can be reached through Gmail at HoosierPrepGridiron@gmail.com. And now's a great time to come on board. We've got some really interesting stuff. We've got a lot of kids that have announced their college plans over the last couple of weeks. We've got our story that just hit tonight on this transfer issue and how there's some potential. I think you guys would be interested in this. Let's say that you're a senior, third string offensive lineman at, let's say, Anderson High School. And you don't think you're going to get any playing time. So maybe what you do now with this new transfer rule is transfer down to a smaller school so you can start and maybe get yourself a college scholarship.
Right.
So, a lot of these kids at these bigger schools are encouraged to specialize.
Mhm.
Everybody talks about they're for the multi-sport athlete, but there's still a lot of specialists out there,
Yeah.
that either can't or won't play multiple sports.
Yep.
And you have to have multi-sport athletes at the small schools. They just can't survive without it. And a lot of those kids are playing 3 sports, some even 4. But we could see a scenario where some of the small 1A, 2A schools become a destination location, maybe for a 4A, 5A, 6A player that's not going to see a lot of action, but wants to play, wants to win, and wants to get more exposure. So that story is running on the platform right now. But
All right.
we love all of our visitors, and we love to cover the whole state. I think that's the biggest difference, guys, between us and everybody else is usually you see a lot of regional coverage throughout the state. Up in Fort Wayne, they do a great job covering the 35 schools up in Fort Wayne. Our friends over at the Region Sports Network up in Northwest Indiana, they got 35 schools there. They cover them. Down in Evansville, they cover the SIAC and the Pocket Athletic Conference. We do the very best we can to try to be a statewide site.
That's awesome.
It's not the easiest thing to do, but fortunately, we've had a lot of participation from the coaches, and I do as much as I can to encourage the coaches to promote their programs, promote their student athletes. This is a different time. This is not 10 years ago where it wasn't important for high school student athletes to get this kind of exposure.
Yeah.
These kids really need this. They thrive on it. And it's not a thing out of hubris. This is something that they need to help them advance to the next level. And, there aren't as much newspapers as there used to be. So the local coverage has died down, and so we encourage. Some coaches do a great job, especially the younger guys. They understand we're in a new age. They understand Facebook, Twitter, whatever else they're using out there, Instagram. They use all this stuff in their daily lives. Some of the older guys, it's a little harder to get them to come around. But like I said earlier, most of them are retiring anyways.
Right. Right. But now
You bet.
I want to offer a challenge to you. I think a good idea would be for some Friday night, say middle of October, you let somebody drive you and they blindfold you. You drive an hour and a half, take the blindfold off, and the first lights you see, that's where you're going. See if you've been there.
That sounds like an interesting challenge.
I'm not letting
I
anybody
haven't
blindfold me like that.
Yeah, I haven't been to as many of those stadiums as I would like to hit, but there's some great ones out there, and there's always some great games to see on Friday night, and it won't be long, fellas. We're looking at the clock is moving fast, and these kids are working hard. A lot of 7-on-7 activity, lineman challenge activities are starting up here in late May and into June. And first week of August, they'll get the pads on, and we'll be ready to strap it up and do it all over again.
Sure will.
Well, thank you so much. We're constantly saying this. Follow, subscribe, like, comment, and share.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. We appreciate it. We got to do it
Appreciate
again.
your time, guys, and enjoy your evening.
Let's do it again.
You bet.